Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the anatomy of forgiveness. And honestly, we're pulling from some incredibly profound source materials here. We're going to start way out at the macro level, looking at these heavy, world-altering philosophical paradoxes, and then we'll seamlessly narrow our focus right down to the micro level. We're talking actionable, daily, psychological rituals that you can actually use in your own life. It's this fascinating progression from the totally abstract to the super practical, and I seriously can't wait to share it with you. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We're moving through four distinct stages today. First, the forgiveness paradox. Second, guilt, shame, and psychology. Third, the four phases of healing. And finally, rituals for letting go. So, starting us off with section one, the forgiveness paradox, philosophy of forgiving. This brings us right to a massive, historically loaded concept posed by the philosopher Jacques Derrida. He asks, is it actually possible to forgive the unforgivable? Derrida argues that there's this ultimate philosophical paradox right at the very heart of forgiveness. Think about it. If you're only forgiving things that are excusable, things that just make sense or where the person has already apologized and made amends, are you actually engaging in true forgiveness? Think about that for a second. Derrida's stance is that true forgiveness must actually do the impossible. It literally only becomes forgiveness when it's applied to the absolutely unforgivable. It is an incredibly challenging, almost impossible standard that forces us to question the very limits of human grace. But not all philosophers agree with that boundless approach. Vladimir Zhenkelevich presented a fiercely opposing view. He stated, quite bluntly actually, that forgiveness died in the death camps. For Zhenkelevich, when we are faced with radical evil, what he calls the inexpiable, forgiveness entirely loses its meaning. It doesn't just become difficult, it actually becomes impossible. When an act targets the very essence of humanity, the anthropological and ethical scales we use to measure forgiveness are completely shattered. 6 million. In his writings regarding the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, Yankelevich illustrates a profound limit to human capability. When an atrocity is of this magnitude, he argues it surpasses any human scale of punishment. And because we can't formulate a punishment proportionate to the crime, well, we also can't formulate a forgiveness proportionate to it either. It's a striking argument that some acts simply exist totally outside the realm of human forgiveness altogether. Now, that is heavy global historical trauma, but let's bring the narrative down from the macro of history into the individual human psyche and see how clinical therapists approach the barriers we face within our own selves. Moving right along to section 2, guilt and psychology, internal barriers. When we look inward, there's really one primary roadblock to self-forgiveness. In clinical therapy, we have to make a hard distinction between guilt and shame. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference. Guilt focuses on the action. It says, I did something bad. It's tied directly to a specific behavior. Shame, on the other hand, attacks the core self. It says, I am fundamentally bad. When someone operates from a shame-based belief system, self-forgiveness feels completely impossible and utterly undeserved, mostly because of that intense shame, people often misunderstand what it actually means to let themselves off the hook. So let's rapid fire through these clinical misconceptions. What is self-forgiveness? Absolutely not. Well, it does not minimize the harm you've caused. It is absolutely not a quick fix or just a one-time event. It's not a denial of responsibility or some kind of excuse, and it is certainly not forgetting or ignoring the past. So if you think self-forgiveness is just washing your hands of the consequences, the clinical data says otherwise. So what is it then? Genuine self-forgiveness is defined clinically as a complex, multi-layered process. It requires you to honestly acknowledge the harm, fully accept responsibility without making any excuses, and then, and honestly, this is the hardest part for many people, extend self-compassion to yourself while simultaneously committing to repair the damage. You literally have to hold intense accountability and deep personal grace at the exact same time. It's not about letting yourself off the hook. It's about holding yourself on the hook while still treating yourself like a human being who is worthy of healing. Now, to navigate that incredibly complex psychological balance, professionals use structured frameworks, which brings us perfectly to our next phase. All right, section 3, the 4 phases of healing, frameworks for recovery. Notice how these frameworks build across entirely different disciplines. In clinical therapy, the phases are grounding, exploring the internal narrative, utilizing compassion, and finally integration. Remarkably, addiction recovery mirrors this almost perfectly, with uncovering the past, making the decision to heal, doing the emotional work, and reaching an outcome of peace. It is absolutely striking how these two completely distinct fields utilize an almost identical step-by-step structural journey to guide individuals out of shame and into peace. In recovery programs, they often distill this whole process down into a highly effective, super memorable framework known as the 4 Rs. First is responsibility, owning your actions without defensive shame. Second, remorse, feeling genuine sorrow for the impact without endless self-punishment. Third, restoration, making amends to rebuild trust wherever possible. And fourth is renewal, rebuilding a life with actual purpose. It's basically a pragmatic ladder out of the pit of endless self-punishment, proving that you really can change your future without being permanently chained to your past. Now, it is essential to point out that this structured journey isn't exactly one size fits all. A skilled therapist really has to understand cultural variations. In Western cultures, forgiveness is often viewed through the lens of individual emotional well-being and personal peace. But in East Asian cultures, the focus is often heavily placed on relationship harmony and restoring social balance. And in animistic cultures like the Hmong tradition, for example, models of forgiveness focus heavily on communal respect and ancestral peace rather than just individual psychology. A clinician can't just dictate a single path. They have to respect the unique cultural framework the individual is operating within. So having explored the heavy philosophy, the clinical psychology, and the structured frameworks, we are now going to shift our focus to what you can physically do today to manifest these concepts. Which leads us to our final part, Section 4, Rituals for Letting Go, Physical Acts of Release. According to Dr. Lauren Tober, a clinical psychologist who incorporates yoga psychology, taking a conceptual idea and turning it into a tactile physical ritual is incredibly powerful. And these are things you can literally try yourself today. You can write down what you want to release on a piece of paper and literally burn it to ashes. You can go to the beach, write your regrets in the sand, and just stand there as the incoming tide washes them away. Or if you need something simpler right now, just practice the ease of letting go by cradling a soft cushion in your hands, slowly pulling your hands apart, and physically watching it drop to the floor. These deeply personal physical acts actually signal to your brain that a release has truly occurred. She also offers a very specific grounding breathing practice. You inhale, visualizing yourself breathing in love or whatever positive energy you wish for yourself. And then on the exhale, you visualize exactly what it is you need to let go of and silently repeat the mantra, I release, I release, I release. Notice how the visualization of the burden kind of fades as you repeat this, leaving you with only the breath and the clear, silent statement of letting go. We've traveled from the impossible paradoxes of post-war philosophy all the way down to the simple, beautiful act of exhaling. And I want to leave you with a quote from Paulo Coelho, featured in Dr. Tober's material. If you're brave enough to say goodbye, life will reward you with a new hello. After looking at the anatomy of forgiveness, from the macro to the micro, the only question left to ask yourself is this: what are you ready to let go of today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this structured journey brings a bit more clarity and peace to your own path.